Hello, this is Josh Belk with the Belk on Business podcast. Once again, I appreciate you taking a few moments to listen in today. Last week, we started talking about the financial metrics that we need to be measuring depending on what phase of the business that we are in. Now, this isn't at all an extensive deep dive into financial metrics depending on the stage of your business. Some of these metrics may apply to your business, some may not apply to your business, but what I'm kind of really hoping is to just kind of give you a baseline of some basic principles as it relates to your business, what phase of the business that you're in, and then what you should be looking at if you happen to be in that phase. Last week we talked about the startup phase. Now, the startup phase is kind of you're just getting the business off the ground, and you're really kind of just trying to figure some things out. And if you missed that podcast, I encourage you to go back and kind of listen to it. We talk a little bit about what it means to be in that phase of business, and then just a few metrics that you should be looking at when you're in that phase of your business. Today, we're going to move to the next phase. Now, each one of these phases of business has different names attributed to it. Some of them, from an accountant's perspective, I kind of like. Others I don't necessarily care for, and that is the case with this particular phase. Generally, it's called the growth phase or the growth stage of the business, and you're transitioning between, you're out of that startup phase, and you're moving hopefully toward the point of being profitable. And I think there's really a stage, sometimes profitability and whether or not the business is truly viable. Many times when you kind of have these conversations, those end up being synonymous. I'm going to break those two apart, and I'll explain why over the next couple weeks. But today we're going to talk a little bit about the growth phase of the business. I've heard this, the Empire Operating System. I was at a seminar out in Utah. I heard this particular phase referred to as the perseverance stage, and I think I like that term even better than I do the growth stage. Hopefully in our business we're always growing, but typically this particular phase is called the growth phase. I've also heard this stage called the survival stage. Okay, so you may have heard these terms used as it relates to this particular phase of the business. The main problem that a business owner has when they're in this particular phase is understanding the relationship between revenue, expenses, and cash flow. And I've heard, and there's shirts out there, T-shirts that are out there that say cash flow on them, and I want cash flow. I'm looking for cash flow, and that's all perfectly fine and good. I can have good cash flow. I can have bad cash flow. I can go down to the bank and take a $100,000 loan out, and all of a sudden I have cash flow. Okay, I have $100,000 in the bank, but guess what? I have to repay it. So that's not a good type of a cash flow. And cash flow is measured in different ways, and we can get into that in a different podcast. But kind of really understanding the relationship between your revenue and your expenses. What are we calling profitability, and then how does it relate to my cash flow? And I'll get into that a little bit as we work through this particular podcast. So the entity generally in this particular phase of business generally does have enough revenue to cover its operating expenses. However, it has not really gotten to the point to where it can consistently cover its debt, and it really hasn't gotten to the point to where it's able to pay us investors back. Okay, so it's really kind of at the point to where revenue is greater than expenses. There's a little bit of what typically people think as profitability, a little bit of profit there, but not enough really to consistently to be able to plan really long, to be able to consistently pay its debts or pay down its debt, and then forget about getting to the point of consistently being able to get to pay back the owner's investment, whether it's the owner that's working in the business, the owner operator, or the one that may be on the sidelines that's invested in the business, hoping to see some sort of a cash flow or ROI at some point in the future. In this particular phase of business, the owner many times is sitting in more than one seat. So it's not owning the business. It is really still operating the business, and it may be sitting in 1, 2, or 3 seats in the business still when it's in this particular phase of the business. So kind of give me a little bit of a picture of maybe you're in this position. You're month over month, you're kind of living quote unquote paycheck to paycheck in your business. You're not able to pay your investors back. Sometimes you're up at night kind of wondering how you're going to pay off that loan payment or that credit card payment in that particular month. And there's still some real struggles that are going on in the business, both structurally as well as I would say even psychologically and emotionally for the owner. The primary KPI that a company would be looking at, a business owner would be looking at in this particular business, really is going to be those indicators in the business that are driving growth. Okay, so how am I getting my customers? How am I reaching my customers? How am I getting money in the door? Okay, so in the first phase, we're kind of starting to get into this. In the second phase, we're really focused on KPIs that are really kind of revenue driven. Okay, and that you'll see that as we kind of go through these particular metrics that we should be looking at. And some of these I'll try to help define. They can be a little bit complicated. I would encourage you, if I kind of mention something here and you're kind of maybe not understanding it or maybe need a visual, podcast isn't really good many times for that, maybe to go to a YouTube video, look up some articles online that may give you some graph to help you visualize this. So the first metric I think we need to understand is the customer lifetime value as it relates, or a ratio to the customer acquisition cost. Talked a little bit about last week about both of these particular metrics as they are stand on their own. Okay, so the lifetime value of a customer, what does that mean? Okay, so the customer lifetime lifetime value of a customer is basically going to be what is the amount of revenue that I'm receiving from that customer times the number of transactions I expect to receive from that customer times my retention rate. And so that essentially is what that lifetime value is going to be of the customer. So how much money am I receiving it? So if it's if I'm dealing with monthly recurring revenue, I am receiving X dollars a month every month for my app. Okay, so I'm taking that amount times the number of months that my average customer pays. Okay, and that is going to be what that lifetime value is. Okay, and so I'm going to take that times my gross margin percentage, and that'll give me the kind of that number. So once you sit down and you kind of figure out what is the amount of revenue I'm going to derive from this customer, and then I'm going to take that as a ratio to the acquisition cost to acquire that customer. So what did it cost me to get that customer in the door? So for example, if I expect my average customer, I am expecting to receive about $3,000 from that particular customer, and on average, it costs me about $300 to receive that customer. You can kind of do that ratio as a 10-to-1 ratio. Okay. Now, kind of across industries, this metric generally is, in order for my business to be profitable, is 3-to-1. But that almost is meaningless because it's really going to depend on what type of business that you're in. Okay, but if it's costing you more to acquire a customer than the amount of revenue you're receiving from that customer, obviously your business is going to fail right off the bat. Okay, but I have to have enough margin there. I have to have enough recurring revenue, or enough revenue from those transactions, enough sales to cover my acquisition cost, and then whatever is left is what I'm going to essentially be using to cover my admin cost, my overhead cost, and also as it relates to being able to cover my debt when I'm in this particular phase. Okay, and as that ratio increases, then at that point I'm able to look into true growth in the business, true scaling of my business, and what do I have enough meat on the bone, so to speak, to be able to invest back into my business. So understanding the first metric of my lifetime value of my customer as it relates to my customer acquisition cost, I need to be monitoring that. Okay, and that spread should be growing the longer longer I am in business. Okay, so if I'm my average lifetime value of my customer is 2-to-1, I'm going to be wanting to make sure that I'm pushing toward 3-to-1. And I also need to understand in my business, what does that ratio need to be in order for my business to survive. Okay, so that's the first metric. The second metric is monthly recurring revenue. We also mentioned this last week. I'm going to continue to monitor this, and I need to make sure that it's increasing. So if I'm in a business and I have a business model to where I'm having a recurring revenue, okay, I need to be saying, is that particular revenue amount, that monthly recurring revenue amount, is it increasing? Is it growing? Is my revenue increasing? Okay, so generally this particular metric will increase, it will improve if I have a repeatable sales strategy, and if I'm understanding my most effective lead channels. Okay, and then if I'm also addressing the pain points in the business as it relates to my customers. Okay, so if I'm doing those types of things, if I'm understanding why my customers are buying, if I'm understanding how to reach my prospective customer, and I'm truly solving their pain points, my revenue is going to increase. If I'm failing in one of these three areas, it may not be growing at all, or it'll be growing in a way that isn't going to be growing quickly enough to make the business get to the point of where it's going to be viable or profitable. Okay, so is my monthly recurring revenue increasing? Is my revenue increasing? Are my sales increasing? Next, is my gross margin increasing? Defined gross margin last week, but gross margin is your net revenue less the cost of goods sold. Okay, so it's your revenue less your cost of goods sold. So I'm going to take my gross revenue, subtract my cost of goods sold. That's going to get me to my net revenue number. Okay, so is that number increasing? And this really goes back to what we talked about here a moment ago. But when I'm going through and I'm selling a product, I need to look, what is it costing me to produce that product? So if I'm in a business where I'm making something, I'm producing something, I have cost of goods sold. What is the material cost? What is the labor cost that went into developing this product and getting this product to the point of where I can sell it to a customer? And then once I sell it to a customer, what is that spread? That's called the gross margin. That number needs to be increasing. So I need to be able to, as my business grows, and I'm working my way through the phase, hopefully I'm able to purchase more from my vendors, from my suppliers, able to get those costs down. I'm able to get to the point of where maybe I'm increasing my revenue, so that way that spread widens, and I'm able to have more to be able to cover the cost of my overhead, my admin, and also get into paying down my debt and my investors. So my cost of goods sold are the costs directly related to the production of the product or service. Generally, we think about material and labor. If your gross margin is increasing, you're able to keep more of your capital to pay administrative costs, debt obligation, and also hopefully for future investment if you're looking to the point of wanting to grow your business. This can be done in several ways, such as changing your pricing model, decreasing your churn rate. We talked a little bit about that last week. And so how many of my customers am I losing? How many of my customers are not renewing? Okay, so decreasing my churn rate, decreasing discounts, and then decreasing the cost to produce the product or service, and then increasing efficiency and good internal controls as it relates to handling my inventory. Okay, so this there's a whole bunch of different factors that can relate to increasing my gross margin. Some of these will be applicable to your business, others may not be. Okay, so you need to understand what is driving my margins. And then what dials do I need to turn in order to get those margins to be greater? So I have more to be able to address my overhead, my admin, to actually be able to pay myself in the business, to actually be able to address debt, and then hopefully also be able to put some money onto the side to invest in the business going forward. And so when I'm looking at my gross margins, a couple other areas quickly that we need to look at. First of all, understanding of what my break-even point is. And there are a number of different methods, generally 3 different methods as far as calculating the break-even point. But bottom line is understanding the amount of revenue that I need to collect in order to cover my fixed and variable cost. Okay, so what is my break-even point? Sometimes when people are going through and calculating their break-even point, they forget their debt obligations. They forget their investor obligations. Okay, those need to be included in there. If I'm truly getting to understanding the break-even point of my business, not only am I covering my fixed and variable cost, but also making sure that in those costs included are the cost as it relates to servicing the debt that I have in the business. And then lastly, understanding cash runway. Also talked about this last week. My cash runway, the length of time which a company can remain solvent. So how much cash do I have? And as I'm analyzing my cash, how much do I have in order to keep my business solvent, keep my business surviving? Hopefully that number is growing. Hopefully that I'm obtaining more and more cash. I'm keeping more and more of my cash in my business to where I get to the point to where I have a comfortable amount of cash to be able to operate my business in a way that allows for my business to be healthy. And the cash runway answers the question, how long can we operate with the cash that we have? And this calculation basically is my cash over my burn rate. If this number is not lengthening, the business will not progress to the next stage. And so if my cash runway is shrinking, if it's shriveling, if it's not increasing, I'm not going to be able to get to the next phase of my business. Okay, and eventually either my company will revert back to the startup phase or will end up failing altogether. So the break-even point focuses on the P&L, whereas the cash runway will also consider the cash that is needed to pay down debt obligations as well. So understanding a few of these metrics I need to be looking at when I'm in this phase. Of course, I think there are probably others. There are others that it's going to relate to your business, but I think these especially are really going to be helpful when you're in this phase of the business to be monitoring on a weekly basis, a monthly basis at least. Okay, but maybe even looking at these on a week over week basis until the point to where my business gets to the point of profitability. Really digging in, understanding what dial do I need to turn, what areas of my business do I need to look at, whether it's on the revenue side, which you're really going to have to do heavily in this stage, but also not neglecting the cost of goods sold area, and looking at what are those areas that maybe I need to address as it relates to the production of my product or my service. Hope this particular podcast was of some help to you. I would encourage you, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the Belk on Business podcast. Thank you once again for taking a few minutes to listen in. This is Josh Belk with the Belk on Business podcast. Have a wonderful day.